influencer marketing is a channel, but you are working with a human being and a creator who spent a lot of time investing in their audience, investing in their content. Chances are they're really protective of that. And if they're working with you or interested in working with you, they want to do a good job. Like, they want this to be successful for both parties. And the best way to set them up for success is to have those details nailed down and finalized before you start any sort of activation or campaign. I've worked with a few creators who have told me some horror stories about halfway through like a 3-month campaign, the KPIs and the metrics just switched. They went from like strictly brand awareness to asking them why they hadn't driven any leads. Why isn't your content performing in that regard? To be honest, it's just not fair to any creator you work with.
It's a good moment to go back and say, see the contract.
Right.
You got to make sure that stuff's in there.
As per my last email.
Yeah.
This episode of Inside the Process is powered by Trainual, the one app that organizes who does what and how. Check it out at trainual.com.
Well, what is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Inside the Process, where we sit down with some of the raddest people in business to dig into how they think and operate to help you continuously improve and level up the work you're doing. I'm Mallory, a 10-year systems and ops veteran turned marketer, and I'm here with Brianna Doe, founder of the marketing agency Verbatim, most recognized probably for her stardom on LinkedIn. She's a multi-award-winning marketer and host of the podcast Stop the Scroll. She's incredibly passionate about creating content and helping content creators get connected to incredible businesses, and we're super stoked to dive into that story today. So welcome, Brianna.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm so excited to be here.
We're so excited to have you. So I met you on LinkedIn as a fellow creator, and within just a year or two, I saw you totally crack the code out there, and you just absolutely blew up. It was incredible to see. I was so stoked for you. And we were seeing you pop up everywhere again and again as a top creator, an award-winning marketer, and just heavily recognized on platforms all over the place. And I think some people might have ridden that wave sort of, all the way to the bank, as they say, and monetized the heck out of that. But you said, nope, I'm going to do something totally crazy, and I'm going to turn what I've learned into a business and help people on both sides of the equation, which I think is so cool and a great place for us to start. So talk to us about that experience and how you went from being a creator to owning a marketing agency.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride. For context, I started in influencer marketing about 10 or 11 years ago, mainly on the D2C and e-commerce side. And when I transitioned into tech, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, that's when I started diving into B2B influencer marketing, which at that point was still incredibly new. So I spent a long time on the marketer side of things, understanding how it worked from a brand perspective. But when you become a creator yourself, it's just so different, right? Like, it's weird to negotiate for yourself as opposed to on behalf of a brand. It's weird to figure out which brands to work for and all of that. And I really quickly noticed that there was just this huge disconnect between what marketers and brands were looking for and what they were trying to solve or do or, communicate through influencers versus what creators and influencers were looking for themselves in terms of goals, income, and all of that. And so while Verbatim is like a brand first influencer agency, I do have a soft spot in my heart for creators and helping them understand, okay, this is how you should properly monetize. This is how you can properly evaluate and understand what your work or your audience, can translate into in terms of revenue. And helping both sides negotiate, I think, more honestly and more transparently has been a huge part of building Verbatim.
And I imagine you get a lot of questions about you as a personal creator from other creators. And today I really want to dig into you as a founder and what you've learned on the B2B side of things, or maybe for today's purposes, we'll call it B2I, right? That business to influencer marketing. If you take that, I want credit for it though.
Deal. Already done.
But what inspired you to start your own influencer marketing business? And what was that sort of moment where you said, okay, I'm doing it. This is the moment.
Yeah, I think so. For me, when I think about why I started it, I had the idea come to me for real when I was in the middle of tech, like in the middle of that very tumultuous job market and
Mm-hmm.
economic climate that we all remember. I was seeing my friends get laid off, my colleagues get laid off. And in the midst of all of it, I had switched jobs and started a new role. And I was deeply unhappy, like almost immediately. It was very uncanny. And I remember I hired a business coach or career coach. And, I told her I want to start understanding what my professional blind spots are. Like, how can I be a stronger leader? What do I need to do to manage up more effectively? Like, why isn't this working? Like, why don't I feel content or satisfied in my 9 to 5 anymore? And we had one call. She just asked me a ton of questions. And at the end, she goes, okay, well, it sounds like you want to work for yourself. I'm happy to continue forward and help you like manage up more effectively and become, a stronger employee, or we can start mapping out your corporate exit. And I thought about it for about 2 seconds and said, I want to go out on my own and I want to start my own business. And when I thought about it, that wasn't a new idea. I'd wanted to start an agency or some sort of like creative firm for a long time. I always enjoyed working with multiple brands at a time in multiple industries. I have always felt very industry agnostic. And so starting to plan out the launch of Verbatim felt really natural and seamless. And I think from there, when I first launched Verbatim, it started as full service, mainly because you have a new business and, you know, most money is good money. Like, if we're being honest, I wasn't about to turn away new clients, but I quickly started to realize what I'm really deeply passionate about is influencer marketing, both B2C and B2B, or B2I, as you framed it. And that's really where I wanted to focus the majority of my time and my team's energy.
Mm. Now, you were talking about sort of your plan for the launch, which can be really scary. There's so much that goes into that, especially as you who's a creator, a visionary, just somebody who really dreams big. And now sort of you have to wear this operational hat that maybe you haven't worn before, maybe you have, but what processes or systems did you have to put in place really early on to secure the foundation of what is now Verbatim?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, I might have gone overboard with the processes. I love a system. Like, I set up so many before I even launched, to the point where it was like, okay, you don't have clients yet. You do not need this in depth of a workflow. But I've always worked under the mindset, or in the mindset, of everything being scalable. Like, I don't want to have to circle back in 2 years and realize I didn't build this system well and now the business is falling apart. Like, why not just put the, systems in place now? So I focused a lot on operationalizing onboarding. Like, when a client joins with us or signs the contract, how seamless is that process? How supported do they feel? I spend a lot of time building that out. And then also, like, the influencer marketing side of things, I would say I spent the most time in terms of systems and processes. So even onboarding for influencers, like, how do I handle the contracting and invoicing portion between brands and influencers? How are we communicating updates? Is it through Slack? Is it through email? Things like that. Making sure that both sides felt really supported, because I think that's an area where you can see a lot go wrong when it comes to influencer partnerships.
Mm-hmm. So I want to dig into that for a second, because we're talking about, influencer onboarding and client onboarding, and there's a lot of processes that go into this, and people who are going to be on the receiving end of a lot of that. And there are two sides to what you do. There's helping the creator monetize their feed. And then there's also this element of helping business leaders, many of whom are your friends now out on LinkedIn with how massive your network is, but helping those people to find influencers who are genuine. And I think there's so much that we can sort of unpack there. And I think there's probably a lot that's gone into your processes and sort of helping that. So for starters, how do you vet influencers that are coming in, and what should we be looking for when we're trying to find the right partners?
Ooh, I love this question. So I think a lot of people start with the follower count. I do not. I recommend starting with first the brand. So you need to understand as a brand what your goals are with this campaign, program, activation, fill in the blank. What are your goals? Who are you trying to target with this specific activation? It might be like a subset of your, more general ICP or target. So understanding who that is, and then understanding where that subset of your audience hangs out on the internet. It could be LinkedIn, especially if we're talking B2B. It could also be Instagram. It could be TikTok. I think we're seeing a lot more B2B brands start to shift over and diversify onto other platforms. So maybe it's YouTube, like understanding where they are on the internet, maybe it's multiple places, and then who they trust in this space. You might find that it's creators that are directly in your industry, but also those that are industry adjacent. So that's the first step. Um, with clients, I always start with it's not that long, like a 60-minute kickoff strategy session where we just really dive into those details and get that figured out. From there, budget to an extent. I think, especially in B2B, you might not know what your budget is. You kind of need to get a gauge on what creators are charging. So understanding in general, like what are you comfortable spending? What would feel reasonable, for lack of a better term? And then we start the influencer discovery process. So there are a lot of platforms out there you can use. You can use Limelight. There's Grin, even Favicon, I believe is how it's pronounced. But I typically do like a grassroots approach. So because I've been in influencer marketing for a minute, I've built up a pretty strong network in general with creators. So I'll leverage those first and then also just start digging in through hashtags, different content pillars, finding creators that are maybe in really niche spaces that are harder to find. And then from there, we start vetting. So there are a few layers to this. One thing I'm really bullish on is making sure that they're not in what are called engagement pods, or ideally using AI generated content. So the thing with engagement pods is you can't always know, like people aren't necessarily going to be truthful about that. So if it's a creator that's signed to like the Verbatim network, we have an agreement in place where they say they can't be in one. With everybody else, we do put it into the contract between the brand and the creator to avoid any sort of podding, as it's called, or AI content.
I want to come back to something you said, because you said we don't look at follower count. And I find that super fascinating, because as somebody who had no idea what they were doing when they launched an influencer program for Trainual, that was one of the first things that I looked at in terms of like, how do we bucketize the different people that we want to go after? You know, the 200,000 plus audience, that we would consider more like macro creators. And then you have like micro creators who maybe fall into the 25 to 100,000 or something like that. And then you've got nano creators. There's all these buckets, right? That you can sort of put influencers in. And you're saying, well, we don't really look at that at all in the beginning. At what point are you looking at that? And how are you ensuring that metrics, so whether it be follower count or engagement or any of these things, how are you ensuring that they're legit, and are you taking them at face value?
Yeah, that's a great point. So to clarify, we do keep an eye on how many followers they have, because it really does depend on the goals for the campaign. So let's say you have a brand that says, we're mainly looking for brand awareness. Not really interested in like driving leads. That's great if we do, but just trying to get our name out there and increase brand recognition. You might lean more heavily on larger influencers with larger followings than you would with like micro or nano. Conversely, you could also say, well, I'm looking for mainly lead generation and demos booked, for example. Maybe you also go with some larger influencers, and you also, like trickle in some micro nano with more targeted or niche audiences. So it's something to keep an eye on along the way, but it really comes into play once you've vetted them from like a podding perspective and from a content perspective. So making sure that it's aligned with your brand, even outside of sponsored content, that they're not creating content that's just completely against your values or the way the brand has been built. For me, the thing with follower count is, I don't know if you've heard this debate, but I see it online all the time. Like micro influencers are who you work with if you want like really niche audiences, like really good engagement. Larger influencers are just for brand awareness. Like they're more of the dinosaurs. And I think now that I have around 200,000 followers and I'm a marketer, I kind of see it differently. Like there's value in both. You can still have niche audiences within like a larger follower count, but that's why it's so important to dig into the analytics and the demographics of your creator's audience, right? You can't just rely on just seeing the number of followers they have and thinking that means that they're a perfect fit. So it's one of those conversations where depends on your goals, depends on your budget, right? Larger influencers are just going to cost more. It's just a fact. And then also understanding that there's probably value in testing both if you have like the bandwidth to do so.
Yeah, one of the things we loved about you, obviously, we've worked with you here at Trainual, and you were our very first influencer that we ever brought on to our influencer marketing program. So I love that we're, full circle a year later having this
Yeah.
conversation. But one of the things that I found so fascinating about you and that sparked my interest from the very beginning is that, yes, you have this larger audience. You were one of the biggest creators that we brought on, whereas we did work with a lot of those, more micro influencers that had sort of like niche audiences. But what I loved about you is that you had several little pockets of those sort of niche audiences. Like when you would share your recruiting content, HR folks, I'd see them all jumping in, right? Like you had these little HR groups that would engage with your content, which is huge for us here at Trainual. You also had a lot of founders that would jump in when you'd share your entrepreneurship content, and you'd sort of see all of those people flood in. And so you had several audiences sort of built under your content because you branched out and you started talking about, entrepreneurship and culture and leadership. And you started building these little micro audiences under that 200,000. And I think that's really sort of a fascinating concept as well.
Yeah, that's a great point and kind of a perfect example because it kind of debunks that myth, right? That like the larger the influencer, the less targeted their audience is. Like I attribute a lot of that to my shift to becoming an entrepreneur. So when I was working in-house at companies, I talked a lot about like job seeking, recruiting content, like you said, mostly from the perspective of a hiring manager. And then I started to diversify my audience. And now it really is those three pockets. It's like recruiters and HR, founders and like C-suite, and then marketing leaders. And so it's really interesting to see how they all kind of show up depending on the post. And it's still impactful. Like the audience, you're still speaking to the people that you want to speak to. I mean, we can thank the algorithm for that, but it's just been really cool to see.
Yeah, I love seeing it. And also one of the things I love is that you talk about being somebody who leads from the front, in the fact that you were a creator first. You started at, one follower, the same as anybody else, and grew it all the way. We keep saying 200,000, but if we're being real, I'm pretty sure you're like closer to 300,000 at this point. But you grew it the same as anybody else has to, right? And so when we talk about leading from the front, it's somebody who's done the job. They know all the ins and outs of it. And you also talked about, hey, when I started this business, I just started tapping on people who I know. We've worked together. I know you've worked with a ton of other creators that I'm also close with. We share, similar connections and things like that. And you start to see people that are building a real genuine reputation, and you're seeing the engagement and tapping on those folks, which I think is really incredible. What are sort of some of the red flags that you start to look for when you say, okay, well, I think I've tapped into everybody that I know for this. I've got to start branching out to people that maybe I'm not as familiar with. So what are you looking for?
Ooh, yeah, the red flags. That's a really, really good question. So, okay, one that I think is talked about less is if I see that they're doing other sponsored content and they're not disclosing it, I see that as a huge red flag. So for context, for those who are listening, the Federal Trade Commission, or the FTC, requires disclosures of like any content essentially where you're getting paid or like endorsed to promote it or to post it. So it could be that you're getting straight up paid, or you're getting free products, or, a discount, whatever the case may be. So you have to disclose that in your post. It could be a hashtag. It could be a statement like, I'm so happy to be partnering with Trainual, right? Something like that. Really simple. And I do see that as one of the biggest red flags, honestly. Like it's really risky for the brand and it's really risky for the creator. Both can get fined, both can get in a lot of trouble. It can damage their reputation. And while I think, it is on brands maybe to put that into their contracts to make sure it's disclosed, I do think it's also on the creators. I see that as a little dishonest, unless it's just, an honest mistake. So that's the first thing I look for. If they've worked with brands before, are they disclosing it? Are they upfront about it? Because that's the kind of, if they are, that's the kind of creator I want to make sure I'm aligning my clients with. After that, I look at engagement. And yes, I look at engagement rates. I ask for media kits and, analytics and all of that. But I also look at who's engaging. Like what kind of conversations are they sparking or, entertaining in, let's say, the last like 10 to 15 posts? Is it more in depth? Are they having like actual discourse? Or do you see a lot of great post or awesome story, things like that. It's really qualitative, right? You can't sit and look through like 2,000 posts and analyze it, but it's helpful to see if they're generating real engagement, if they've built like real trust and credibility, or if it's just really surface level. So that can be good to see too, to gauge. And then I would also say this one's a bit harder to quantify as well, but if the engagement looks manufactured, which kind of ties into the last one. So it goes back to our conversation about pods, which I don't know if it would be helpful to explain what a pod is, but an engagement pod is essentially, okay. So an engagement pod is basically, I say to Mallory, hey, like I have this group of 10 people and I think they all pay me probably, right, to like be part of this pod, and we'll go and comment on each other's posts. You can pay extra and I'll add you to like my worldwide pod where you post something, drop a link in this chat, and then we'll just send a bunch of like bots and other accounts over to engage. So you're essentially like boosting artificial engagement. Your metrics look great. It looks like, you have a lot of comments, a lot of likes, a lot of shares, but it's not real. Like you're not actually generating real engagement. I think that sums it up. Would you add anything to that?
I would, and it's a shame story. I'm not going to lie. Okay. So I told you that, I was brand new to marketing. Okay. I was an operations vet for 10 years, turned marketer. And one of my first tasks as a marketer was to build an influencer program. And you can imagine that was a big undertaking. Learned a lot, had a blast doing it, but we put it on pause for a couple of reasons. One, I'm going to dig into in a little bit, but one of the reasons is just the actual, like trying to figure out, are we just in it for brand awareness? Was the link to our campaign actually clicked? Did we have any conversions? And a lot of what I saw was pod activity. They had like 300,000 followers and by all accounts were, great. They had tons of comments and engagement and just looked incredible. They were incredible to work with. And then after the fact, when I stopped working with them, I got all these emails from them and from other people about, oh, you should work with this creator. And I started to see all these connections. And I was like, oh my gosh, is this a pod? And it was sort of this gray area, right? It's not a full blown pod. Maybe they're using AI and bot activity and some other things like that. But it really was sort of more what you talked about, where it's like these people sort of teaming up together to skirt the system, right? Like manipulate the algorithm in a sense. And I still to this day get emails from the same group of people of like, hey, I'd love to work together again. And I'm like, they're all recommending each other, because I had worked with, I think, 2 of them. And interestingly enough, like they're each recommending each other and like sending all these emails. And it's hard to sort of explain out loud, but you realize like all the little pieces sort of add up and you're like, oh my gosh, this is sort of this gray area of being in a pod, and the metrics just didn't add up. And then you have to wonder, okay, well, we still probably had some brand awareness. So it's not a total loss, because there is some effectiveness, right, to what they're doing, because it's still helping that post reach thousands of people in the feed. But what's not happening is you're not tapping into the audience that you thought you were. So those aren't like your ICP fit customers or future customers like you thought that you were signing up for. And so maybe talk to us a little bit about sort of that gray area of, it's not a glaring in your face pod, but it's still a pod in the sense that you're not going to get the type of conversions and activity or awareness that you think you're going to get.
Oh, yeah, you you summed it up perfectly. It's such a gray area and it's so murky, and it reminds me a lot of just AI in general. Like the fact that we're in the midst of it. So we're still kind of figuring out like what we're doing. Laws are still being passed around it with AI and things like that. So it's definitely murky. And you alluded to something that I also want to highlight too. Like there's a part of the reason it's a gray area is because there's nothing wrong with like texting your friend and saying, hey, I posted this. And can you just go like it? Or like a friend liking your post. Like, I don't know. I feel like that's okay. It's okay to have friends. I mean, I don't do that, but it's okay to have friends and have them engage, like
I mean, I'll be real. I did it in the beginning. Like me and my,
it
a couple of my
helps.
friends that were creators, we would send each other and be like, hey, here's my post for the day. And it was sort of like an accountability thing too when we first
Yeah.
started, with just two of us. But that was extremely short lived in the very, very, very early days.
Yeah, and I think a part of it too is as a creator, especially if you're new to it, if it's just not natural for you, like there's nothing wrong with wanting support. And I think maybe what we're getting to is it's about intention. Like I posted something the other day that was a little, I wouldn't say polarizing, but a little outside of my usual content, and I was nervous. And I sent it to my friend and I was just like, okay, what do you think about this? I just posted it. Do you think it's okay? And she liked it. Like she went and liked it. Doesn't mean I'm in a pod. It just means that I got support. Same as you and your friends. The difference, in my opinion, I'm curious what you think, is when the intention is to manufacture engagement and make your metrics look better. Like if you consistently have posts with 5,000 likes and 42,000 comments, which is an absurd engagement rate, but like 42,000 comments.
I was like, wow, that sounds like totally backwards.
I know I said it and I was like, anyway, 4,200 comments, like that's going to look really good to brands. That's going to look good to clients that you want, right? That want your help with personal branding or whatever. And so I think that's why it's so murky and such a gray area. There's nothing wrong with connecting with people on social and all of that. It's when it's fake and you're doing it to look better for the sake of like monetary gain, personal branding, etc. Does that would you agree?
Yeah, I think that totally tracks. And I think a lot of it too is around sort of starting with your goal, like bringing it back to what you said too. If brand awareness is my goal, I feel like there's maybe less risk involved versus if my goal is a certain number of conversions or demos booked or products sold or whatever the motivation is. That's where you really have to start maybe digging in a lot deeper into those like niche audiences and really kind of ripping apart the metrics more so than if you're just doing a brand awareness play. Would you say that's true?
That's a good point, and I would agree to a great extent. I think the one caveat is, so I have a few clients, for example, who, when they came to me, they'd already started doing influencer marketing. It wasn't working, and the main reason it wasn't working was they're saying, we're getting the brand awareness. Like, our reach is insane. It's great. Our C-suite or our CEO is not pleased with who we're reaching. Like we're reaching, I don't know, let's say we're reaching recruiters, but our target audience are marketing leaders. So they're still not happy with those results because it's not the right type of reach. And so I think that's why it is still important to look into the analytics and demographics of the audiences of the creators you're working with. And to your point, that's why, it can still be frustrating when you like invest all of this into a few influencers and then it doesn't even pan out from an awareness perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's such a good ad. And I touched on that a little bit with, how I looked at your audience when we brought you on. Is there anything you've built into your foundational processes to sort of help avoid maybe working with like the wrong partner?
A few things. So I wouldn't say I require a media kit, but especially with B2C, I do to a great extent expect the creator to have one. And then I also want screenshots. Now, the problem is everything's digital, right? Like things can be altered and that's just an unfortunate reality. But I think people are a lot more likely to be honest and transparent when you start asking for more information, right? Like, I want your analytics for these. Can you send over some the analytics of, let's say, like your past 4 sponsored posts with other brands, just so we can start to get an idea of like who you're reaching, what engagement looks like, things like that. And it's not to paint them into a corner. It's just really to help protect the brand and to protect the creator's reputation and like future opportunities. So that's one thing. And then I would also say I always advise brands against signing, let's say, like a 3, 6, 12-month deal until they've worked with the creator at least a few times. It's you can really like a creator's content, you can like the audience they've built, but you still aren't going to be entirely sure if it's the best fit until you experiment a few times and give them the opportunity to experiment with their content, give you the opportunity to like refine or optimize how you work together. So kind of building that relationship and that rapport, and then, expanding the agreement or expanding the deal.
What do you expect to see in a well built out media kit?
Audience demographics. So ideally location, maybe this is going to depend on the platform too, but job titles or at least industry. Engagement rates. If they have multiple channels, let's say they have a newsletter and a podcast and, a LinkedIn profile, I want to see analytics for all of those. And then the demographics, whatever they can pull for each. And then maybe some, this is like a nice to have, they don't need to put it, but if they just proactively include examples from past sponsored posts and content, you have to include the analytics in your media kit, but anything they can share that show me they've worked with other brands before is helpful. I have also seen testimonials in some of them from previous brand partners. I think that's really cool. I think you don't see that as often, and I think it's a really nice way to build trust and credibility.
I love that. And so, we put influencers under the spotlight quite a bit here, which honestly, a place they love to be, right?
Right.
But obviously, we talked about some of the pitfalls of influencer marketing with pods and things like that. And so it's only fair that we also ask the question, like, how can I as a business be a good partner to an influencer? What can I be doing?
Yeah, also a great question. So first and foremost, way back when, near the beginning of this, I mentioned taking the time at the beginning to understand and identify your goals for the campaign, who you're trying to reach, what you're trying to communicate or say. Let's say it's a launch or just a new product or, just the brand in general. That needs to be understood and aligned upon internally before you start engaging with influencers. You can start having conversations, but I think it's important to remember, like, an influencer, influencer marketing is a channel, but you are working with a human being and a creator who spent a lot of time investing in their audience, investing in their content. Chances are they're really protective of that. And if they're working with you or interested in working with you, they want to do a good job. Like, they want this to be successful for both parties. And the best way to set them up for success is to have those details nailed down and finalized before you start any sort of activation or campaign. I've worked with a few creators who have told me some horror stories about, halfway through like a 3-month campaign, the KPIs and the metrics just switched. They went from like strictly brand awareness to asking them why they hadn't driven any leads. Why isn't your content performing in that regard? And that's not, to be honest, it's just not fair to any creator you work with.
It's a good moment to go back and say, see the contract.
Right.
You got to make sure that stuff's in there.
As per my last email.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important. It's not the same as turning off a paid ad and turning on a new one with a different campaign objective, right? And so it's really important to do that internal alignment work beforehand. And if you can't get there, if you can't finalize your goals and your metrics for the campaign, then you're not ready to launch an influencer campaign. It's really important to, not just with your team, with the leadership team, with, if you need to bring in other departments, like, there just needs to be as much cohesion as possible. And then I would also say communication along the way, at the beginning and along the way and at the end. Like I said, like, creators are humans. We're all humans. And chances are, if you are starting an influencer program or starting to launch campaigns, you are also trying to build rapport, right? It's going to be a lot more successful and a lot more effective if you're building some sort of relationship. And I'm sure you've heard this term about, not letting it just be transactional. I think that's great, but like, taking it a step further, you want it to be relational in the sense that you're building trust with the influencer, just like they're building trust with you. I think as marketers or as brands, we focus on the content they're creating, right? Like, how is this content performing? But the influencer is going to post that content, get off their laptop, and then go talk to their friends or their colleagues. And there could be word of mouth referrals, right? There are going to be things that just aren't as attributable. And those are still really important. So making sure that you're protecting your brand's reputation along the way is crucial. And good communication is a great way to do that.
Yeah. I mean, for years to come too, right? Like, when you build a relationship with somebody and you have a partnership, and you're invested in that way, I feel like for years to come, they could be on your mind for things and come up in conversation. So I'm really glad you touched on that. But I also want to talk about the transactional piece that you mentioned, because I think there's a really important thing here for businesses to remember when they're working with an influencer, and that's not to let the post also appear transactional, right? Where it's like the content looks totally outside the norm of what people expect in their audience, and then you see mega influencers that share a post that feels like a commercial, and nobody's immune to that post totally tanking, right? Like just doing terrible compared to the rest of their posts. So what's your best advice for, leaders listening today who may be thinking about partnering with an influencer? How do they protect the authenticity of the creator, which is why they were so invested in wanting to partner with them, but also how it makes their brand look?
Ooh, yeah, that is a great point. I mean, we see it all the time. One thing first, it's important to remember, I know I keep saying this to some extent, but chances are you're working with this creator because you really admire or like or appreciate the audience they've built, the trust they've built, and how they've shaped their content to continue building trust and building relationships within their audience. You are essentially renting space on their profile, right? But they are going to have a much deeper understanding of and insight into what will resonate, what will work with their audience, what won't, how to speak to them, because that's what they do every day or every other day. And so remembering that when you start engaging with influencers is crucial. And I think a really great way to protect your brand in this sense is to have what's called like a campaign brief or a creative brief. So in it, you typically put messaging that you want them to avoid, messaging that you are comfortable with them using. I know for some industries, there's a lot of red tape with that. So like, we can't make these certain disclosures or these certain claims, things like that. If it's a certain like launch or new product that you want them to promote, giving them as much clarity as possible into what that is. And then also just including general information about the brand itself. Like this is our typical tone and voice. Like this is who we're trying to reach. Basically giving them as much information as possible so that they can work within the parameters that you shared, but still make the content their own. And on top of that, making sure they have complete access to whatever it is that you want them to promote. If it's like a product, you need to send them the product. If it's like a software, they need full access to the software. I think I'd be curious what you think, but I think a lot of posts that I see that are transactional or salesy, it's either, the brand basically told them what to say and that was it, or the brand gave them very little insight or access into what they're supposed to be promoting, and then they just have to kind of figure it out. And that's going to sound more like a commercial, right? And so making sure you're giving them the right access, giving them all the necessary information, messaging, all of that is crucial. And there's a template I can share too, if that would be helpful for creative brief. But that's a great way to make sure you're on the same page, but the influencer can still make the content their own.
Yeah, I think that's such good advice. And yes, I have seen it. Just recently, I flagged something with a friend who was running an influencer campaign, and I said, "Hey, I'm pretty sure they got the name of your feature wrong. Like, it's off by just a little bit, but like it's noticeable. I know the feature is called this, and they're saying the feature is called this. And so it like the disconnect is surely there. And so, yeah, I mean, it happens. It could be like the smallest little thing. We have the delegation planner in Trainual, and I've heard people call it Trainual Delegate before. And I'm like, well, that's not exactly what you're on the right, mark there, but it's the delegation planner. But those little shifts, right, make all the difference in whether or not somebody is truly using and advocating for whatever it is that they're championing. So the last question I want to ask you, and this is around timing, because you hit on a bunch of different things, but I think the one thing that's still a question mark for me is timing. And I want to bring this up because the algorithm is a game of time, right? Like how consistently a person is posting, and if there are sudden dips in it. So if you're somebody who posts every other day, then keep posting every other day when you post whatever content we're partnered on. If you're somebody who posts every day, then make sure it's within that, 24-hour mark. Or if you're somebody who posts every 3 days, I'm not saying like you have to change what you're doing, but it is really important to be consistent. And I've worked with people before who are like, man, I was sick for a week. I took a week off and then I posted and the post kind of tanked. I'm really sorry. She was incredible. She's like, I'm going to post it again once I kind of get back to my normal consistency. We've also talked about too, like, making sure that there aren't too many posts like back to back. If you're doing like multiple collaborations or things like that, obviously you're somebody who people just love to work with. And it's making sure that we're not, posting 2 brand posts or something like that back to back. So talk to us a little bit about what you've learned around timing.
That's a great call out. Because I remember too, when we were working together, I remember I had a post go viral, like mega viral. And my Trainual post was scheduled the next day and we moved it.
Yeah.
Because with my content, typically, like if one post goes mega viral, the next one does well, but it can sometimes like skew the engagement a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we put like a 2-day buffer. It wasn't anything crazy. Mm-hmm. But yeah, timing is crucial. I think to your point, like whatever creator's cadence is, make sure they're still able to work within that for your post or for the content they're creating for your brand. And great point, actually, with like back-to-back collaborations. I think we see some creators who they just start to look like a billboard. It's like one after the other. And it's a double-edged sword, right? It's damaging the creator's reputation a bit. It's also probably damaging their engagement. It's just going to keep tanking. Less people are going to start commenting, so the algorithm will show it to less people. And then for the brand, you kind of just look like one of the many. And so making sure that you're able to kind of have a buffer in there whenever possible. You can even put language in agreements sometimes, typically around competitors, but maybe in general, like not being back to back with another collaboration or not posting about a competitor within 30, 60, 90 days. I see that really often. Because I think that's also something to point out with timing is if a creator is working with your brand and your direct competitor and you have back-to-back posts or even within the same month, that just looks confusing to the audience, damages the creator's credibility. And then, I mean, what are they supposed to do with that information, right? Like which brand do they pick?
Right.
I think we saw that with Gymshark recently, if you heard about that.
I didn't, but I've seen it before for sure.
Yeah, it's a perfect example. Like they work with the creator, the contract ended, the creator signed another contract with a competitor, I think posted within like 10 days. And that was against the agreement. So making sure you have language in your agreement to kind of protect against that is really important.
Yeah, really good advice. So sort of to bring this to a close here, where do you suggest companies invest in influencers right now? What platform are you most excited about?
Well, I'm biased. I would say LinkedIn, but I think mainly because it's so new to the influencer marketing space. Creators are popping up everywhere and there's not a lot of brands doing it. So there's just a lot of opportunity and untapped potential for companies, but it has to make sense for your audience and your campaign, right? Like if they don't really engage on LinkedIn, it's probably not the best fit, but I would say chances are that they do. So look into LinkedIn at least, see if it's a viable channel for your brand. And then start testing out some influencer partnerships. Most creators on there, they post, but they maybe have a newsletter or podcast or some variation of, all three. So finding different ways to engage. And then I know, right now, like TikTok's a bit of a influx, but I would say Instagram or YouTube, actually. YouTube is a huge one.
Yeah, YouTube is something I'm starting to dig into a lot more. I think there's so much potential in YouTube.
There's so much potential, and there's this like hunger and desire for more longer form content from consumers. So kind of jumping on that train and investing in partnerships that are centered around YouTube, I think is a really great call.
So what's next for you and Verbatim? What are you excited about?
Oh man, I'm just excited to keep helping brands figure out the B2B side of it. I think it's confusing in a way that B2C is not, because B2C influence marketing has been around for so much longer. There's more standardization. I could Google anything about B2C influencers right now and find a million articles, and that's just not really the case with B2B yet. So I'm really excited for that. And I'm also really excited for this shift that we're starting to see with how brands collaborate with influencers, right? Like we're putting on micro events. A lot of influencers starting to shift to in-person pop-ups and meetups and collaborations, and brands are starting to also invest in that. And so I think it's a really cool time to, I don't know, it's just a really cool time to be in this space. It's really fun.
I love that. What's one thing that you hope people take away from this session today?
I hope people take away that it's okay to not have it all figured out before you launch your first campaign, but there are certain things you do need to have in place. You need to know why you're doing it. You need to know who you're trying to speak to and who you're trying to target. And that's just going to set you up for success, set the creators up for success, and then you can figure out the rest as you go.
I love it. Do it, document it, delegate it. You got to do it first. Just ship
Yes.
it, figure it out, get messy, and then it'll all work out until you have something you can document and turn into a business like you did, which is incredible.
Exactly.
So thanks so much for joining us today, Brianna. Tell folks where they can follow you. What's your handle? We know your place is LinkedIn.
Yeah, LinkedIn is my place. So you can just find me at Brianna Doe, or weareverbatim.com.
Awesome. Well, be sure to click the link in our show notes for a made-for-you process template that highlights all the best practices highlighted today. It sounds like you're going to share a creative brief with us as well that we'll put into the influencer marketing template that we will build out with Brianna. So we'll make that available for you. As always, document your processes and please be a good human. We will catch you next time.